Welcome to our talk on ChatGPT and why it matters. So I'm joined by Jesse Spencer-Smith, who's the Chief Data Scientist at the Data Science Institute and a professor of the practice of computer science, and Doug Schmidt, the Cornelius Vanderbilt Professor of Computer Science. I'm Jules White. I'm an associate professor in computer science, and I'm the Associate Dean of Strategic Learning Programs in the School of Engineering. So I'm very excited to talk to you today about why ChatGPT is so exciting and why it's going to matter for so many different industries. And it's always difficult to try to explain what are the capabilities of ChatGPT, why are they so powerful? And what I usually find helps the most is to actually start by interacting with ChatGPT and to show examples from ChatGPT. So what I've done to get us started is I've actually taken an example that I ran through ChatGPT and I brought it into my slides. And hopefully this example will give you a sense of the power behind these models and also the sense that we can use them as tools to help us for a variety of different tasks. So I tried to pick out what is a task that would be really interesting to start with that would also show the capability. They could do something different. And so I tried to pick a task that I thought would be very hard for a human to do, and certainly hard in the time that ChatGPT was able to do it, and also difficult to do at the same level of quality that ChatGPT did it, particularly within the time limit. So the task that I came up with is I said, please create a meal plan for my family that is based on a fusion of food from Ethiopia and Uzbekistan. I want to eat keto and up to 2,000 calories per day. Pick dishes where the ingredients are easy to get from an average US grocery store. So this is my prompt or my statement that I gave to ChatGPT. And what did it say? It said, here is a sample meal plan that combines flavors from Ethiopia and Uzbekistan while also being keto friendly and within a 2,000 calorie per day limit. And then it goes on and it says breakfast, scrambled eggs with sauteed onions, tomatoes, and Ethiopian berber spice mix. And then it has in parentheses, made with chili powder, paprika, garlic powder, ginger, cumin, and coriander, served with a side of avocado. It also has lunch, Uzbek-style lamb kebabs. So it really quickly, and this was near instantaneous, generated a sample meal plan for me. Now, if you think about this, this is a really complex task. I don't think that there's a single resource that you can go and just look up and say, I'd like cuisine from Ethiopia and Uzbekistan at the same time that's also keto friendly, that fits within this calorie goal and is easy to get from the US grocery store. That's a complex task to put all those things together. And it may not be perfect, but it's done a very good job of generating an initial draft for me of that meal plan. And you'll notice when it, for example, says that berber spice mix and it has in parentheses and it says made with chili powder, paprika, etc. It's telling me, hey, these are spices that you can get in the grocery store. If you also look at, I was keto for a while, so if you look at the recipes, they're pretty keto friendly. There could be some arguing with it, and we could go and refine this and say, I don't want to eat this or that, and it could probably refine it, but it's done a pretty good job. But one of the things that I want to show you about these types of tools is that you should really think of them as something that isn't just a one-off. You don't just give it one question and then get an answer. A lot of what we see in the news when people are talking about it is they say, I asked this question, I got this bad answer. But really it's a tool that you use and interact with over and over and through a conversation. So the way to kind of think of it is it's kind of like a hammer. And if you're going to build a sculpture, you don't go and whack the stone one time and say, oh, it doesn't look like I wanted it to, and walk away. No, you keep chipping away and chiseling away at the stone with the hammer. And the hammer is your tool to get there. And it requires consistent use of the hammer to improve the output that it's given. So I'm going to go and I'm going to say, I noticed that it didn't give me any portion sizes. So I say, can you give me an approximate serving size for myself for each dish that is within my 2,000 calorie limit? Because I need to know how much to eat, and it didn't give that to me the first time. And it says, sure. Here are approximate serving sizes for each dish based on a 2,000 calorie per day limit. Breakfast, scrambled eggs with sauteed onions, tomatoes, and berber spice. And now it says 2 eggs, half a cup of onions, half a cup of tomatoes, 1 teaspoon of berber spice. And it goes on to give me updated serving sizes for each one. And so it took something that it had produced that was imperfect, and I began refining it and improving it using what was done. Now, if I go on to the next thing, I thought, well, what else could I do with this? And I thought, well, I have a 9-year-old, and he's a pretty adventurous eater, but he's not always the most adventurous. And so maybe there's some way that I can help motivate him to try these dishes. So I said, my son is 9. Sometimes he won't try new dishes. To make this culinary adventure more fun for him, can you create a short Pokemon battle story to go with each dish? And if you aren't familiar with Pokemon, it's a card game and cartoon that my son loves. I will read the stories with him before dinner to get him excited about trying the new food. Make sure the story ends with a cliffhanger that will motivate him to try the food. So this is a pretty complex task. And it says, certainly, here are some short Pokemon battle stories to go with each dish. And it gives me the dish, and then it says, story, Pikachu and his friends were exploring the wilds of Ethiopia when they were suddenly ambushed by a group of sneaky Pokemon thieves, and it goes on. They have to defeat the Berbere dragon, which, if you remember, Berbere was a spice that it listed. And then it ends with, can you help Pikachu and his friends defeat the Berbere dragon and enjoy this spicy breakfast? So it's ending, and it's trying to come up with some type of cliffhanger to draw my son in and get him to try this new meal. So if you think about that, it's not a perfect cliffhanger. It's not a perfect story. It could probably be improved. We could always find lots of issues with it, but it's doing a really complicated series of tasks. It's taking content, it's refining it, using my input to improve it. It's building new things out of it. And so we're using this tool to continue to chisel away and refine and shape and sculpt these ideas into something interesting. And now we've actually got something that's really sort of different and unique. And then I thought, well, what else do we do at dinner time that I could potentially get, ChatGPT's help with? And I said, well, sometimes at dinner we like to, as a family, talk about what's going on with my son at school, and he's always really into the educational math games that they play, particularly on the iPad at school. So I said, I would like you to play a math game with my 9-year-old to teach him about divisions with fractions and nutrition. Ask him questions one at a time involving Pokemon and these topics and make it into a game. When he wins, the Pokemon win. Ask the first question. And so now I'm asking it, can you interact with my 9-year-old and help him learn math? And ChatGPT says, great, let's play a fun math game involving Pokemon and nutrition. Question 1, Pikachu and his friends are planning a meal that includes half a cup of cooked rice, but they needed to divide it evenly among 3 Pokemon. How much rice will each Pokemon get? And they have some hints, and they say if you get stuck, you can ask for help. But you can imagine now we've created an educational experience. We took these recipes, we got stories out of them, we mixed in Pokemon. Now we've got an educational game and experience for my son. And what do? Well, then I said, okay, it asked me a question, I'm going to answer it. So I answer 1/6. And then it tells me, good job, that's correct. Each Pokemon will get 1/6 a cup of cooked rice. And then it explains the work behind it, which is something that my son is always complaining about when his teacher's asking him to write out his work and explain how he got there. And it's doing that to help my son along. And so one of the other things you'll notice about this is actually we flipped the script. Before we were asking questions to ChatGPT, but now we've actually got it asking us questions and we're responding with answers, or my son should be responding with answers. And then it's telling us about our answer. So it shows you that there's the ability to go deeper than just, ask a question, get an answer, but you can have entire conversations, you can build games, you can flip the interaction script and do some really complicated things. Then I thought, well, this is all good, but, at dinner, I don't necessarily want to have ChatGPT open and asking it questions about, having to interact with my son. I thought it would be nice if I could take this game and I could extract it out of just a chat, and I could turn it into an actual piece of software that I could run on my laptop or on an iPad or somewhere else. And so I asked ChatGPT, I say, let's create code for this in Python. Python is a programming language that you can use to write software. And I go on to give it some instructions that use my domain knowledge of computer science to ask it to turn this thing into a piece of software that I can run on a computer in order to have this math quiz game in a browser. And it goes and it generates code for me. And I'm not going to show all the code because it generates quite a bit, but it generates code for the math game. And I took the code and I ran it on my computer. And then what I get is a browser-based math game that is asking the questions, same questions, but now I can run it independent of ChatGPT. It allows my son to do multiple choice fractions. You can also seed it with other questions. But hopefully this example motivates to you that ChatGPT is much more than just a question answering tool. It is a tool that you can go and you can take thought and you can give it all kinds of different forms. It could be a game, it could be a meal plan, it could be an answer to a question, or it could be a piece of software or something much more complex. And so we have to really reframe our thinking about what this tool can do and how it could potentially be used.
So this seems pretty magical, the things that this model can do. So what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about where ChatGPT came from, how it gets these capabilities, and what some of the limitations are that arise from as well. So ChatGPT is definitely an AI application, and we've been working on AI for quite some time. So really since the 50s, that was the first time that we started to actually try to solve this problem of getting computers to do human-like things. But frankly, none of it was very successful. Time and time again, we had disappointments where we didn't even want to talk about AI anymore, so we called those AI winters. I got started in my graduate school around in the late 80s, working with neural nets. But then around 1990, we started to get some traction, be able to solve some real problems with machine learning using techniques like random forests, gradient boosting. But with these, it was always the case that you trained a model to solve one problem and you solved the problem. So then around the 2000s, we started to get some traction with what's called deep learning. So this is something which extended on the previous work with neural nets, but they were bigger, much, much larger. And these were different because you didn't have to describe everything to solve a problem. Instead, you could give it unstructured information. It could learn from, it could learn its own features to solve problems. And beautifully, you had something that was called transfer learning. So if you solved one problem, say a vision problem, then it turns out that you could solve the next vision problem much, much faster. You could take that pre-trained network and use it and leverage it to solve the next problem. And this was very successful in a number of fields, especially in vision, but it was still pretty limited. If you solved a vision problem, then you had a pre-trained model which could do vision, and you could do vision things. So then we hit upon an approach that has led to state-of-the-art performance, not just in one area: text, audio, video, pretty much any sequences that you can think of, and solving problems that we thought were really not easily solved at all at one point. Translation, natural language understanding, natural language processing. So what allowed us to do that? Well, it was transformers. So transformers are the technology and are the models which are underpinning ChatGPT. So what's different? We've been trying since the 50s. Why is it successful now? Well, it's actually a couple of different things. One is definitely there is more compute. So yeah, you have more compute, that helps. You have to have compute. Second, we now have a very powerful general purpose learner. That's a transformer. And third, we have self-supervised learning. So previous, rather than trying to label all the data and train on it, now we have an approach that's called self-supervised learning. So what does that mean? Well, the way that we train ChatGPT is not to teach it specific things. Instead, we ask it to guess missing words. This is called the masked word task. All right, so here's a sentence: ships at a distance have every man's wish on blank. Oof, that was quick. Very first sentence of Zora Neale Hurston's, their eyes were watching God. I'll show it to you one more time, and I want you to think about what the missing word could be. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on blank. All right, so some words that I get when I ask this are on star. Okay, interesting. Matter of fact, all the words that people guess are nouns. Well, that means that they understand that they have to choose a noun because it's the object of a preposition. And then they begin to guess not just any old noun, but nouns that have to do with something in the sentence. So in this case, I've had answers star. So people are focusing on the word star and then are focusing on the word wish and then answering star. And that's okay, but it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. All right, so on shore, another case, another noun, but now it's focusing on ships and things at sea. Not quite the right answer. So it turns out that you need to, not just to guess a noun, you have to know the semantics of all the other words in the sentence. So we're having to guess words that have to do with ships and shores and wishes. Then we have to figure out which particular part to attend to. This is called attention. So if you pull it all together, you say, oh, I need to pay attention to ship. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on deck. Not bad, not bad. But it could be better because this is really poetic sounding, right? And deck isn't very poetic. Okay, how about ships at the distance have every man's wish on board? Ah, that's it. And actually, that's the missing word. So think about all the things that you'd have to get right, you'd have to learn in order to get that answer right. You have to know, first of all, the rules of the language. You have to know the semantics of all the other words. You have to know the meaning of the sentence. You have to know where to attend to, that attention. And then you have to know writing styles as well. This is the trick. This is how you train models, transformer models like ChatGPT. So this is what a transformer looks like. This is the context. This is going in. This is the sentence that you put in. Please make a Pokemon game. You put in a sentence here. This is the deep learning framework right here. And the important part right here is the decoding stack. This is where all the memory is. This is where most of the learning takes place. And then what it's doing is it's just guessing the next word. That's all that it's doing. So, we run it through on short. No, that's not right. If it's wrong, then we do something that's called backpropagation, which means we're actually altering the weights in the network. We're altering the network, and so the next time, it'll make a better guess. And so it'll go through, on board, that's correct. So the model with immense amounts of calculation, immense amounts of compute, begins to learn these representations and begins to learn the rules of the language, the semantics, and on the way to doing that, learns a great deal about the world. So it's not just that it's learning just this sentence, it's learning representations of the world. But there are a couple of limitations here. One, that context is limited. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of compute. So context might be limited to 2,000 tokens. A token is about a word. Sometimes a word takes more than one. Maybe 4,000, but limited. You can't just put everything. Second of all that the original model is doing is guessing the next word, and think about what it's being trained on. We train on text from the internet. So it's books, conversations, Reddit. That's where a lot of this training comes from. So think about what it's learning. So it's learning what's on the internet. Have you ever run across anything on the internet which was wrong? Have you ever run across anything on the internet which was pretty terrible? Well, the model learns all of these. Those are all represented. Notice here that this model does not have access to the internet. As a matter of fact, everything that it learns is stored right in here. So ChatGPT, it only knows what it was trained when the training ended. And the training ended for ChatGPT in June of 2021. So that's all that it knows. It can't go to the internet, and it doesn't have a perfect representation of everything on the internet. It's getting things approximately right. And that's how ChatGPT works. You make it work better by making those encoder stacks bigger, and that's how these models get big. They get bigger and bigger to be able to store more information. So that's essentially what's happening here. So how can you actually go and improve a model without having to do training? Well, the context. if you give it a much better prompt, then it can work better for you. You can't really train the model anymore. That's expensive. You're not going to be able to do it. Can't afford to do it. Can't do it on your computer. It's too big. So instead, we concentrate on prompt engineering, which is the idea that if you give a better prompt, then the model will be able to do more things for you and be able to meet your needs better.
Yeah, so to pick up where Jesse left off, so prompts are, if you want to think about them, they're essentially the statements that you give to a tool like ChatGPT. So if you say, write a poem about the French Revolution, or you ask it to generate a meal plan, it's the sentences or the words that you give it. And so basically the prompt is your input, and the output is the text that ChatGPT or another tool like it generates. So one of the most important things is that the prompts really matter. Just like if you pick up a tool, the quality of what you get out is going to be based on the skill that you have with the tool. So the better you are at using the tool, the better the output you're going to get, the better the product you're going to be able to produce. So if you know how to use a hammer really well, you can chisel and create beautiful sculpture. If you don't know how to use it very well, you're not going to get something of high quality out. And that's why the prompts are so important, is because the prompts are the way that the human is able to inject their skill into the use of the tool. So the more precise your prompt is, the more information that's encoded into it, the better the output. But also what we found is that if you have the right patterns of statements and other things in your prompt, you can tap into these sort of unexpected and really powerful capabilities within the underlying tool itself. And so in order to be effective, you really have to understand prompt engineering, which is basically the discipline of focusing on how do you write good prompts and how do you maintain them. So one of the things that we're seeing with these tools is they're evolving really quickly. There's ChatGPT, there's GPT-4, there's Bard is coming out, there's Llama from Facebook. There's all these different models, and you have to both produce good prompts, but you also have to be able to maintain them as the models change. And so prompt engineering is all of the discipline that's focused around building and maintaining these prompts. So within different domains and industries and businesses, prompt engineering is going to become a very important part of a variety of disciplines, because you're going to need to be able to use these tools and use them effectively. What we've been studying, one of the things, is prompt patterns, and basically the patterns of how you structure your language in order to build really effective interactions with these tools. So rather than talking about a particular example, like I said this weird thing and it produced this weird output, instead thinking about what is the pattern of my language? What is the fundamental set of statements that I gave that produced or created some capability that I care about? And so we've been working on researching and documenting these different patterns so that people can go in and they can understand, if I have this problem I want to solve, they can go and find the appropriate pattern of statements that you need to give to ChatGPT or another tool like it in order to tap into these capabilities to solve that problem. If you're interested in learning more about these, I have one of our papers, and I've also pasted two of our papers into chat. This first paper is really done not from a computer scientist perspective, but just from a more general perspective. It has a lot of domain independent patterns. But I'm going to talk about one in particular that kind of shows you the power of these patterns and why they're important. So one of the patterns that we've documented in our paper is called the persona pattern. And the idea behind this pattern is that sometimes you would like to get an output from the tool, but you don't know exactly what that output should be or what it should look like. But if you were in the real world, you know who you would ask or what you would go to get that output. So if I had financial questions, I might go to my financial advisor and ask my financial advisor. And I don't know what my financial advisor would tell me, but I know that that would be the right person to ask. Or if I had a question about programming and I was a student, I might ask my computer science professor for help. And so the persona pattern is basically a way that you can ask ChatGPT or another tool to act like a particular persona and produce output like that persona. So you basically tell ChatGPT, act as this persona, and whenever you produce outputs that persona would produce. So I might say act as a computer science professor, and whenever you produce an output, produce outputs that computer science professor would produce. And this is basically, I don't know exactly what they'll tell me, but I know who to ask. You could also ask it to take a persona like in a computer. You can say, act as a computer that's been the victim of a cyber attack. When I type in commands, output what that computer would output if it had been hacked. And it can do that. You can do these complex simulations through this pattern. Now, to give you an example of the persona pattern, I thought up this morning, I was trying to think, what can I do as the persona pattern that's something that I don't really know anything about, but I can also fact check. And so my wife is a speech language pathologist. And so I said, act as a speech language pathologist. I'm going to tell you what a 3-year-old said, and you will write an assessment for me. And my wife is, somebody that I could take this output to and talk through it with her. She wasn't happy about this in the morning when she was getting ready. And I was saying, look at what ChatGPT said. And so I say, act as a speech pathologist. And I say, the child said, I need way woy. And so I was trying to think back to when my son was 3 and still sort of getting his language together of something he might have said, I need play toy. That was kind of the idea. But I wanted it to be difficult, right? To not, ambiguous what was supposed to be said. So what does ChatGPT say? Well, it says assessment of a 3-year-old speech sample. And it says, based on the provided speech sample, it appears that this child may be experiencing some phonological and articulation errors, which are common in children around this age. So you notice I didn't tell it to go give me a phonological or articulation assessment of this child, but it knew because I was asking for that persona to go and do it. And then it goes on to say consonant errors. It seems that the child is having difficulty with the production of some consonant sounds, specifically the N and L sound. The child said mead instead of need and woy instead of toy. And you notice it has an understanding of the underlying language, and it's figuring out. And it says, assuming the intended words were need and toy. So it's figuring out what the child was trying to say. And then it goes on to say syllable structure. The child's production of the word way may indicate some difficulty with the correct syllable structure. It is possible the child intended to say play, but produced way instead, which suggests a substitution of the initial consonant plus or PL. Now, I could not have asked this. I could not have gone to my wife and said, could you produce an analysis of the syllable structure or any of these other things? But I knew that my wife is a speech pathologist and she would know the answer, so I could ask ChatGPT to act like this. And I read all of this to my wife, and she was very critical. She said, well, it's not going to, and I don't think it's going to take my wife's job. But it shows you the power of these patterns to go and refine and understand things, and it obviously has a depth of language. And one of the interesting things is that it says, considering the child's age, it is important to remember that some speech sound errors are developmentally appropriate and may resolve on their own with time. And when I started reading this to my wife, her initial response is, if that's a 3-year-old, that's probably going to be fine and go away. And all of this seems overblown. And then I get to the end and I said, but look, ChatGPT says that too at the end. So she wasn't a fan of the example, but it shows you kind of the power. I don't know, and I couldn't have asked it for all of these different assessments because I wouldn't know what to ask for. But I know who to ask, and so using this pattern, you can get this type of output. And we have a whole bunch of other patterns like this that you can use that are cataloged in our paper, and I'd encourage you to take a look at some of these things.
So hi, I'm Doug Schmidt. I'm a computer science professor here at Vanderbilt. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how I've been applying ChatGPT in one of the courses, actually 2 of the courses that I'm teaching this semester. The courses are very similar. And so I started to get into this about 4 weeks ago. And so what you're seeing here is really hot off the press examples of using this technology in a Vanderbilt class. The class that I teach focuses on developing and testing things called microservices, which are ways of taking computation and splitting them up so they can run in a web-based environment, the kind of things we use all the time when we check our credit card balance or we go to Amazon and make purchases and so on. And nowadays, because of the fact we've got so much computation, it's important to know how to take advantage of all that computation effectively. And these computations can run on mobile devices, smartphones, laptops, desktops, tablets, cloud servers, and so on and so forth. And you can find out more about my class if you click on the link at the bottom of the slides, which we'll provide later. So right now in this semester, we're developing a movie recommendation system where people type in movies that they've seen, and then the system will tell them what movies they might like to see. If you've used Netflix or Amazon Prime or you have a Fire Stick, you've undoubtedly seen something quite a bit like this. So what I've been really focusing on is how I can use ChatGPT to make me a more effective teacher, make my lectures more interesting, make my assignments more interesting, make me more interesting. And what I've found is what I'll be describing here. But I found, just in a nutshell, it's been tremendously effective at making me a lot more productive, and I think hopefully more enjoyable for my students. So one of the things I've done, I've been an expert at concurrent programming, which means how do you run multiple operations at the same time, taking advantage of modern multi-core processors. I've done this for quite a long time, and my classes had a lot of that characteristic. However, there were gaps in my own background, my own education. For example, I didn't have much experience with database programming. I didn't have much experience developing server-side application capabilities using modern web application platforms. So up to this point, up to the last couple of weeks, when I had an issue there, I would go see my friends like Jules and say, Jules, can you help me figure out how to do this? Well, that obviously doesn't scale very well. But what I've been able to use ChatGPT for is to learn these techniques that I was missing and then be able to teach those topics to my students much more rapidly. So for example, what I can do now is I can use ChatGPT to give natural language prompts saying, I would like to generate a database query method that will find all the movies in a database whose title contains words in a string. And ChatGPT can take that and generate the exact piece of code that I need in order to get my system to do that, which is great because I didn't really know how to do that before. Likewise, I can also go a little deeper. I can say, hey, ChatGPT, what's the actual underlying SQL query that this method that you generated for me is performing under the hood? And boom, it'll instantly generate the code. So I not only know how to program it, but I also understand what's going on behind the scenes, which makes me have a deeper understanding of this piece of technology that up to this point I was really a novice at. What I can also do is generate sample code that I can use to show my students how to do their assignments using advanced techniques I wasn't even aware of until just a few weeks ago. So for example, one of the things you can do is you can have ChatGPT generate custom queries that they don't correspond to things you can do by just using natural language descriptions to generate query methods or SQL statements, but you can actually get it to write code to do the work for you, which is fantastic because I had no idea how to do that. I could also have it generate the other various minutiae that's needed to make my software run properly, like import statements to bring in the right libraries. I can get it to comment my code. One of the things that most developers tend to not like doing is writing comments, which is why so much code is hard to read because nobody takes time to document it. But ChatGPT can actually read your code and generate very descriptive comments, which you're then welcome to refine and improve if you want. But I find it makes it much less painful to document my code, which is really important for my students to understand what's going on. And then it can also generate other somewhat minutia things that are very low-level details, the type of dependencies that my code has on libraries that need to be brought into my project in order to run it in a particular interactive development environment. What's interesting about ChatGPT is, as Jesse pointed out, it was trained for information as of about September 2021. And so newer things that have happened since then, it's often not aware of. And we'll talk a bit more about that when we talk about how to use ChatGPT effectively in your courses. But sometimes it'll be missing some things. So what do you do in that case? It's like Jules' example about taking a swag at taking a hit on a stone as a stonemason. You go back and use other tools like normal Google search to fill in the blanks that ChatGPT doesn't know about. Another thing I use it for is oftentimes my students will submit really clever solutions to my assignments, and at first glance, it's not even clear to me what they're trying to do. So now all I need to do is I simply feed their clever solutions into ChatGPT, and boom, it comes back and gives me a description of what their code is doing. And then I'm like, oh, of course that's what that's doing. But sometimes they'll be using older versions of the languages we're programming in or older versions of libraries, and I might want to update things to the modern versions. Once again, I simply take the code and I tell ChatGPT, please regenerate this code I gave you, but using a modern way of doing things. And again, within seconds, as Jules' example of the recipes and so on, it generates modern code using the most advanced features that are available. And what's also nice is it can do this in multiple programming languages. One of the real challenges, just like in everyday life with human languages, we have lots of different programming languages to convey our intent to computers. Some of them are very familiar. I'm a Java programmer, for example, but I don't really know Python very well. However, with ChatGPT, I can simply ask it, please generate the code that you spit out for me in Java, but do it in Python. And boom, I get the Python version. That's a pretty popular language, so I could probably find a student to do it for me. But what if I'm using a language that's not as popular, more esoteric, like Ada, which was developed for the Department of Defense back in the 1980s? I can ask it to generate Ada code. It would be very, 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 very hard for me to find anybody at Vanderbilt who would know how to generate Ada code at this point. It'd be hard to find most people in general. But if I needed it, ChatGPT knows how to do it. So once again, huge productivity boost. One of the other important things with computing is making sure that the examples are correct. It's not enough to just generate code, but you have to make sure that it works. So you can also get ChatGPT to generate tests to make sure your code works. And it's usually pretty straightforward to figure out whether the tests are correct, because you can run them and look at the output and convince yourself that ChatGPT isn't leading you astray. I can also use it, and I do use it quite a bit, to help explain subtle concepts when students ask me questions about topics. And I'm maybe a little bit unclear. What exactly is that distinction? ChatGPT can be used to go in and give me some deeper understanding. And best of all, it'll actually generate examples, because I often find, at least from my learning style, if I can see an example, that helps me understand better how to understand it myself and how to explain it to other people. So it's fantastically useful in that respect. So, what are some general strategies that I've found thus far in the past month using ChatGPT effectively in teaching Vanderbilt computer science courses? So, what I decided to do very early on was to encourage my students rather than discourage them from using ChatGPT in our course. There's a lot of hand wringing going on in academia and beyond, for good reason, about how can we deal with this brand new way of generating information, generating output, generating creative artifacts. Some people want to pretend like it's not there. Other people, like myself, are trying to embrace it to see how we can use it effectively to be more productive, and most importantly, how to train our students to be more insightful and also more productive, and get them ready for the brave new world of tomorrow, where people are going to be using these technologies in everything that they do. So, some of the things that are very pragmatic, we have to rethink the way in which we do course assessments. How do we do assignments? How do we do tests, quizzes, exams, and so on? And just pretending like ChatGPT doesn't exist, or going to extreme lengths to try to make it impossible to use it, isn't always the most effective approach. For example, I could have all my tests done in class with a pencil and paper, but that's really not the way that people write programs. And so it's not a good assessment of whether students are prepared for the real world, be it in academia or industry. So one thing I'm doing to try to address this is I make my assignments deliberately more open-ended. I give people specifications in English, and then I encourage them to use ChatGPT to try to figure out how to implement those natural language expressions in the form of comments or specifications in a way that will actually compile and run in the environment and pass the test cases. And that's precisely how people are going to be using this in practice. They're going to be using it as a tool to facilitate or augment human cognition. So this is very representative of how I think this is going to work in everyday life. But ChatGPT doesn't always generate exactly the right code, so they have to figure out how to adapt it and adjust it, just the way that Jules talked about in terms of the example from the speech pathology. You don't just take it at its face value, but you go on and you do some refinements and revisions. I'm also making my quizzes and exams harder. I'm doing everything electronically, so it's easy for students to get caught up in the enthusiasm and use ChatGPT in ways perhaps they shouldn't. So one way I'm trying to address this is making my quizzes and exams more contextual. They come from discussions that we have in class, rather than things that can be easily looked up through ChatGPT for information that it has been able to glean from reading all kinds of sources over the past many years. So ask about things that we did in class, ask about assignments where there's really no easy way to look that up on the internet or through ChatGPT. I also have found that by using more modern techniques in my classes and my examples, that also is effective, because ChatGPT has a cutoff date of September 2021. And so things that occurred before that point, after that point, it doesn't know about. So I've been updating my assignments and my teaching to use the latest and greatest versions of things, which is good for a couple reasons. It forces me to be modern. It teaches my students things that are going to be cutting edge. And it also makes it hard for ChatGPT to just give them the solution lock, stock, and barrel without thinking through the actual subtleties. A couple other things I really focus on. It's super important for students to understand both the benefits and the limitations of tools like ChatGPT. And we have to be very upfront about this. To Jesse's earlier point, if you have training sets that are well defined, and there's lots of examples, for example, popular programming languages or popular platforms like Android or iOS or Spring, ChatGPT does a really nice job often of giving you examples that are correct and efficient and so on. However, if you start getting off the beaten path, you'll find out that ChatGPT begins to hallucinate, which is just a somewhat whimsical way of saying it'll generate a lot of nonsense very quickly. And ChatGPT, one of the things you have to get used to is it'll give you the wrong answers just as quickly and enthusiastically as it gives you the correct answers. And in that respect, it reminds me, I'm sure many of you have really smart friends who are great at some subject. Maybe they're great mathematicians or great programmers or great philosophers, but they may not have a breadth of knowledge in every area. But they're so confident and enthusiastic when they give you a response, it sounds like they know what they're talking about, even when they're just speculating and making things up. So I find that you have to view ChatGPT like that friend, where they know a lot about certain things, but they will sometimes pretend to know about things they don't know about. And you have to always be a little skeptical and do some double checking, use other sources, which is just a good habit for us to get into in general. So to kind of wrap up this part, I think it's very, very clear based on the month I've spent using this technology that the current notion of software development, where we do everything, mostly things manually, is going to be replaced or is in the process of being replaced by one in which people, like me and my students and my colleagues, and AI tools like ChatGPT are trustworthy collaborators that can be used to work together to rapidly evolve software-reliant systems based on higher level specifications of intent. And I think that's one of the things we're really thinking through at Vanderbilt in the computer science program is how do we do this effectively? How do we balance the need to give people fundamentals and then teach them these tools that can make them much more productive? And you can read more about this at the link at the bottom of the slide. In fact, throughout my slides, I had links to various other sources you might want to take a look at.
So what comes next? This is a very, very fast-moving field. I'm teaching a course on transformers right now, the underlying technology, where we are talking about and covering ChatGPT. And I've had to dedicate a substantial portion of my class every week simply to get caught up on what's new and what's happening. So what's next? Well, it's not really next. It's currently going on right now. Bing GPT is a type of ChatGPT that has access to tooling. It can connect to the internet and then add that into its own context to give you more updated answers. So it can be aware of what's happening and use, the latest news or use the latest version of libraries. So it's been trained to know when it needs to get more information from the web. So that's Bing GPT. You have access to it today. Multimodal models are being produced. So these are models that work with audio, image, video. So if you think about it, the training of ChatGPT, it doesn't have to be text. It could be audio because it learns on sequences. So just like I gave you that Zora Neale Hurston's and I spoke it to you, the model can learn in that way as well. And it can also learn from images. So that self-supervised training can give you multimodal models. Image generation models are huge right now. And, you can think of this a little bit of the flip side. Similar types of technologies that can generate images based on prompts. Also, just recently, Alpaca, which is a much smaller version of the model, but one that is still very, very capable and was actually trained using output from ChatGPT. So smaller model using ChatGPT to train itself. The interesting thing about Alpaca is it could run locally. So this is a way to have private and sensitive information that might be able to run locally. It's unclear exactly what the capabilities of Alpaca. And finally, the next version of ChatGPT, which was released last Wednesday, Okay, GPT-4. So what's different about GPT-4? It has a much longer context. So instead of about 4,000 tokens or words, you have 32,000 in the largest version. So now you have a lot of extra space in your context. You can describe things. If you are trying to do some programming, but it was a library that wasn't released until 2022, hey, no problem. Copy and paste the entire documentation, put it into your context and say, I'm interested in writing this program. Please use the API we just described above. So that's a powerful way to use that extra space. You get much better performance. You can take text and you can take image prompts as well. So what does this look like? Well, GPT-4 has human level performance. So on the bar, the uniform bar exam that lawyers have to take, it scored a 90th percentile. So it passed the bar. LSAT, it did pretty well on the LSAT. SAT, about 710 on reading, 700 on math, not bad. GRE also did 80th percentile, 99th percentile on verbal. Let's see if you start going into like AP exams, it's making 5s and 4s. Funny enough, on AP English language and composition, it only made a 2. So it's not actually that great on sophisticated writing. So it knows facts and it can do reasoning and other important things, but on literature and composition, not so high. But in other areas, absolutely doing very, very well in terms of learning the representation. So coding. So coding, as you've seen, it can handle sort of common coding, but even very challenging programming, it's getting better. Leak code, very challenging programming assignments here. 31 out of 41, when you start getting to medium and to hard, is not performing as well. So obviously more room there for performance improvement. But here's the really stunning part. In the new GPT-4, it can take images. This is not broadly available right now, but you can, this is an example from I Love Science, he had access to GPT-4. What is funny about this image? For context, it was in an art museum and then pasted in a picture. GPT-4 responds. The funny aspect of this image is that people are treating a pair of glasses left on the floor as if it were a piece of art, taking photographs and observing it as if it has artistic significance. It highlights the idea that in a museum setting, even ordinary objects can be perceived as art, leading to humor and confusion. So think about what this opens up. If you can take a screenshot of what's going on your computer and say, what is wrong here? What is the error that I'm seeing? Or an image and then ask for an interpretation. Or even sketching out a website that you would like to have and say, write code that would give me this website. So tremendous capabilities in ChatGPT and GPT-4. So if you'd like to learn more, remember the two articles that Jules mentioned before, but also like to point out that we actually have free workshops that are available. So we have an entire 4-week seminar. It's intensive workshops. The link is right here. It's on Bitly. It's AI Summer, all one word. And we cover models like ChatGPT, how they're trained, and actually how to train your own versions and how to use them as well. And actually next week, we're going to have an AI Revolution Symposium. On the 27th, on Monday, is going to be workshops on making prompts and using these models. On the 28th, going to be exploring the impact on academia and on. I'd like to go ahead and take questions now. We've had a number of questions come across, and some of these I'm going to answer from the ones that you've posted. One of them, Billy Dye, asked, can you ask ChatGPT how certain it is of its answer? Yes and no. If you're writing code, a smart thing to do is to write tests first to make sure that the code that it's producing is correct. But one of the interesting things that was released about GPT-4 is that it got worse at determining what it was getting, at its confidence, what it was likely getting right and likely getting wrong with additional training. So this is an area that still needs to research. But Bing GPT and other models that have access to the internet, that helps because you can point it to particular areas and say, only reference areas, only reference papers or articles in this area. And then at least you know where it's generating from.
One of the things that happens really quickly as you use it is you determine when it is hallucinating pretty fast. And ChatGPT is very obsequious. If you say, you made a mistake, ChatGPT, can you correct it? It'll always give you this fawning, I'm so sorry for the confusion I caused you. But when it gets in a hallucination kick, it'll just keep giving you false answer after false answer. So after about 2 or 3 of those, unless you're really good at prompt engineering and try to coax it to do something sensible, I usually give up and then go try to find other means to get the right answer.
And Jules, anything else to add?
I just, my assumption is that everything it produces may have an error. And so I've got to own anything that it produces. So, I don't trust anything that comes out immediately. I assume it's like a working draft that then I can take and, work with.
Mark G had a question. Can you discuss the emergent behaviors of these large language models? This is an area of intense interest, and especially for me. My PhD is actually in cognitive psychology and cognitive science. And one fascinating element of these models is that they demonstrate emergent behavior. So we've talked about how the models are trained, how expensive it is for the model to learn something new. But one thing that they can do is something that's called in-context learning. And what this looks like is you state a problem, you give a solution. You state a problem, you give it a solution. All in that context, sort of the prompt that you give it beforehand. And then you give it another problem. And it can learn, and it can, on its own, but only for the period when it's doing the inference, when it's actually running, figure out what the pattern is and actually build its own bespoke model to solve this problem, give you an answer, and then everything goes away. So this is not training. This is the model building its own meta model to answer the problem that you're giving it, and then it goes away. This only happens with models that are large, about 7 billion parameters or more. Now, ChatGPT itself is very large. So you're talking about billions, hundreds of billions of parameters. And we don't know how large GPT-4 is because that was not shared. The more parameters you have, the more a model can absorb, the more it can learn, and the more of these emergent behavior that you see with large language models. This is an area of intense research right now, so there's definitely more to come.
And it's probably worth filling in on that point that one of the things we're interested in doing here at Vanderbilt is creating our own private models and our own private model repositories so we can train on data sets that might not be available in the general public, and we may not want to have the information available in the general public. So there's all kinds of sensitive information, things like proposals or works in progress, where if we had the ability to do that kind of analysis and model training, we could be quite competitive, but don't want to rely on the public versions to do the work for us.
And to add on to what Jesse said, the in-context learning, some of the most interesting prompt engineering techniques right now use that to build up patterns of like, how do you teach it to use external tools? So, not just to solve a problem using the knowledge it already has, but actually to know when it needs to use another tool. And so you can show it examples where you have some problem that requires maybe some capabilities that it has, but also places where it needs to go and use another tool to gain additional information or to perform a calculation that it couldn't do easily. And so you can give it examples where you go through a problem and you use one example where it does some reasoning, then a tool does some operation, and then it performs some reasoning on the output of that. And you can give it a few number of these examples, and then it can go and actually learn itself to call out to the appropriate tools. And there are a variety of different frameworks that were mentioned in the questions that can help support these types of interactions where it actually goes and, calls something else or some other piece of software.
So these are, sometimes these types of models are tool formers. That was the name of the original model that had this capability. It's a real way, especially when you have the models with these much longer contexts, for them to be able to go out, get an entire article or multiple articles and summarize or compare and use that information. So long context is really. I have another question from Rebecca. I'm a parent of currently a student. I'm all in on ChatGPT 4. Is the AI seminar open only to students? No, actually, that is open to all. You can register for virtually attend both the seminar, both the symposium on Monday and Tuesday of next week. We'll put the link in the chat in just a moment, and also in that longer AI summer as well. You're welcome to participate. Well, here's the link for the two in the chat. So can you clarify? It sounds like ChatGPT has been updated since September 2021. Yes, most of the training for GPT-4 was ended in September 2021, but it had additional training for fine tuning, and so it learned some additional things that happened after 2020. You can't count on it having a deep or good understanding broadly of what's happened since then. But actually, it was exposed to more, and just through that training, that self-supervised training, it learned about more current events in that way.
Jesse, there's one that I think would be a great question, and it's from Carrie Sweeney. She says, you made the case that ChatGPT is going to affect everything. How do you envision Vanderbilt preparing students who are not in computer science engineering so that they can use these capabilities as they enter the workforce? And so I think one of the actually amazing things about this tool is that it is natural language. So you don't have to be a computer scientist to use it. You really just have to have kind of an understanding of how to write prompts and how to structure them. That's part of the reason we've been doing this research on prompt patterns. And so you can teach people the patterns of how to structure their language to, unlock these capabilities. We're also working together, the three of us and other collaborators, to build courses that are for undergraduates and graduate students to understand how to use these tools regardless of domain and not just inside of computer science.
Well, one thing that's absolutely fascinating that's about to happen, and we're the beginning, all of us on this call are at the very beginning of this new trend. If you think about it, interacting with large language models like ChatGPT is a form of programming. We're just programming them using natural language. And so in the same way that everybody who's alive today in school grew up most likely with touch screens and mobile devices and interacting with things with very touch-driven modalities, and then therefore perplexed when they have to use things like a mouse. In the future, everybody will know how to program as long as they have access to a computer. Some people will want to go further and get into more structured and stylized programming languages, but everybody will know how to program. And so you don't have to be a computer scientist. And the other wonderful thing is the barrier to entry is just about non-existent. Anyone can start with this tool right now. I pay $20 a month to get the plus version, which is just a little bit more accessible usually, but you don't need to do that. You can play with it, and it's going to become ubiquitous in almost everything that we do in the internet.
Also, I'll mention that we are definitely aware that all areas of the university are going to need to have access and to have training. And that's part of the reason for the DSI, Data Science Institute, offering all of these workshops to get people up to speed so they can use this in their classroom and they can use it in their research as well. I've just put a link to the AI Revolutions Symposium and also to the AI Summer, and I invite you all to attend if you are interested. And I believe we're right at the end of our time right now, but I would like to thank you all very much for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't have the chance to get to all of them. Jules, would you like to give a farewell?
Yes, thank you all for attending, and hopefully you'll be seeing more things from us and others around campus around these sort of fascinating capabilities from these tools. And so thank you for attending, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us via email if you have any additional questions that we didn't get to.
I'll put up on the screen our email addresses if you're interested in reaching out. Again, thank you very much.